great day for me today. I am celebrating a son of Africa who is practically writing, making right by writing. He's an award-winning journalist, but more so is passionate about our history because our past defines how we run our affairs. Gatu Mbaria, karibu.
Asante.
So, Mbaria, like he calls himself sometimes, is rarely seen because he's a journalist, so he likes to be behind the camera. He has been an investigative journalist, writing great pieces that have won him awards locally and internationally. He has written for some of the biggest papers in East Africa. But in this book that changes our perspective about ourselves, it also changed him. So today we want to find out the courage, the audacity that he had to write this book. Just a brief. I think some of us have watched our history of the colonial times, and we are so gutted and annoyed when we see the audacity of the colonialists who they came, they saw, they tortured, and then they settled. And then they had the audacity to say, this place cannot be settled by natives. 100 years on, they still have the audacity to demarcate parts of our country and say no communities are allowed. And it is because of this that Mbaria had a Damascus moment. Take us back to the turning point why you decided enough was enough.
Thank you. Like she said, I am Mbaria, and for about 20 something years, I've written on conservation, on land issues, environment, tourism. And so initially, when I was very green, I was introduced to the way things worked. And I was invited to embrace it. To an extent, I can say that I was almost co-opted into a system of see no you, hear no you, and do nothing. So this was the time I was writing stories about the great wilderness, stories that would invite as many tourists as possible. So I remember one day when we were a group of us journalists, we were out there trying to cover how tourism is organized in Shaba Game Reserve. Shaba Game Reserve is in Isiolo County. It's a reserve that has actually been very attractive even to filmmakers. So when we were there, and we were many of us, I think we were in two vans. One van was carrying people from the TV, the other was carrying people from print media. But there was this one moment when we were supposed to climb some rock outcrop just close to River Ewasonyiro. River Ewasonyiro, for those who don't know, moves from Nyandarua all the way to Wajir, and somehow it disappears in some swamp in Wajir. So it crosses Isiolo. So where we were, it was such a beautiful place. We were climbing the rocks, and down there, the river was passing. And there was this elderly woman, Samburu woman, who came from the bush. I don't even know where she came from. I was up there because I'm usually very fit, even today I'm fit. So I was up there and I was looking down. And as other journalists were struggling to climb, I started watching what was happening. For some reason, my attention was attracted to this elderly woman. And I watched her every move. She had carried this 20-liter jerrycan of water, and she dipped it into the muddy Ewasonyiro waters. And something crossed my mind. This is a river that is infested with crocodiles. It's a river that is muddy. And here we are, climbing. So I started asking myself, this is the woman whose community, the Samburu, together with other pastoralists, preserved for the world what the world enjoys today. But here she was. She cannot even enjoy the water. Mind you, there are many subterranean streams that move from Mount Kenya all the way to Isiolo. And they actually, somehow they emanate from the ground in Shaba. So you are finding Shaba is like an oasis. There is even a waterfall with very clean water where tourists go there to just not just take pictures, even remove their clothes and wash. And this woman cannot enjoy that water. This is the same woman, the land that Shaba constitutes the Shaba belonged to her community. And here she was, she cannot even enjoy the water. So I started wondering what would happen if a crocodile just jumped on her. We were there as journalists with cameras. Probably somebody would have taken an award-winning photo. And the woman would have just died. Her life would just ended. Well, that day it didn't happen. But that's what changed my whole perspective about conservation. Initially, I was writing feel-good stories about the good that NGOs do. I was writing about projects that are always piloted, projects that are always started. And I started now asking myself and trying to know exactly why there is this dichotomy between the benefits that accrue to those that came after Kenya was colonized, and the benefits that accrue to let me call them natives, the people who own the land, the people whose traditional conservation ethics and traditional conservation philosophy preserved for the world what the world enjoys in Kenya. So that altered my whole approach. I started from that day, I decided that I'm going to focus on the wrongs that were very clear then, but I could not see them because I was actually almost co-opted into the system that it's about feel good, talk no evil.
See no evil.
Yeah.
In the introduction to this book changes your outlook, that there are people who can actually tell it as it is. And the most striking thing when I got hold of this book was just the dedication, because the book is dedicated to our ancestors who lived with, used, and conserved our biodiversity without being paid crumbs to do so. To those of us who struggle today to wrest this most precious resource from the grip of a vicious elite, and to our children and the unborn who we hope will appreciate this bounty and never forget that it is their birthright. So, Bwana Mbaria, this book must have changed your life the way it changes those who encounter it, because Africans are not expected to stand up to our saviors. You call it romanticization, and in the book there's a very interesting story about a famous man who became the symbol of savior for the lions, and you are unapologetic. What was the backlash for writing this book, and what was the good thing about writing it? Who are the fans of this book? I know I'm a fan of this book and you have many fans, but what was the backlash of telling this story as it is?
The good thing is that it lifted off from me many of the things that I tried to cover right from after what you wanted to call Damascus moment. It lifted from me feelings of this heavy burden, because I encountered a lot of injustices. So for me, at a personal level, it was a way of just putting it out there. Obviously, part of the book is actually the stories that I did as a journalist working for Nation Media Group, the East African, and also writing for other papers in other parts of the world. But the main thing is that we were able to record, we were able to put it for posterity, that these are the injustices. But since we did the book, since we wrote the book, Well, for some, it has not been easy going. One of the things that happened is that as many as 7 publishers in Kenya could not touch the book. We moved from one publisher to the other with the manuscript. All of them refused. We talked to somebody in Canada, a publisher in Canada, and he had the book. His wife is a publisher, but we sent it to him. So he had the manuscript for like 2 months. We waited for him. He never responded. Eventually, he said that he's not going to do it. We tried Yale University in the US. They also refused. So, but somehow we got somebody who was born and brought up in Kenya but lives in the US, who agreed to publish the book. But I have seen people, in the book we use the word errant natives. Errant natives is a term that we use in the book. It's a term that we coined in 2003 when I was writing for this magazine, the Ecoforum, to denote, or rather to explain people who do not conform, people who question the systems as they are. So the good thing is that when we started now, it's also like a joke. We started now calling ourselves errant natives. We never intended it to be a movement. We never intended it to be, we never knew that it's going to become quite popular. So I found it interesting, but I was glad too that there were people who started calling them errant natives all the way from Nairobi to Wajir. I remember meeting somebody who is a retired teacher, an elderly man, who actually calls himself errant native, and I thought that was very good. And the other thing is that people have also started questioning that, or even not even questioning, not just questioning, but even getting, being attentive to things that we were never attentive about in the past. I think Kenya is one place where for a long time, many people thought conservation, wildlife belongs to white people. But now you're finding people who are looking at it like it's their own, it's their heritage. The way Egyptians look at pyramids as their heritage, this is how people are looking at it today. And for this, I'm not saying that you cannot say that this is we are the ones that actually created this awareness, but I think we helped to either to shape it. I cannot say that the awareness was not there. We helped to shape it. We helped to strengthen it. But we also, to some extent, you find that we also created some enemies here and there. And we never intended to do that. Although these are stories that I've covered over the years, some of the stories I've covered over the years. But I know there are people who are not very happy about it. But we did not write the book to make anybody happy or to make anybody angry. We wrote the facts as they are, as we encountered them. Personally, as a journalist, and my colleague, Dr. Mordecai Ogada, as a carnivore ecologist, who worked very closely with the powers that be as far as conservation is concerned in this country. Yeah.
Your stories, if I look back at some of the stories now I've discovered, your writing was not noticed because Kenyans don't read even newspapers. The people you did a lot of exposés. You exposed very powerful individuals, and you're still doing it. When you talk about the royal family, for example, and the involvement with it, how has the government received these two errant natives, challenging the systems that work very closely with them?
The government has been very silent. Interestingly, we have never encountered anybody from the government wanting to know or not to know. I know Ogada has some connections with people in conservation and tourism, But personally, I've never met anybody in the government wanting to know whether, or even criticize or even getting angry. But you see, there's this thing about Muzungus in this country. Let me say this, and I want to be very candid about this. You can criticize the president in this country. Some people can even go to an extent of even insulting the president. But Mzungus, don't touch. That's a no-go zone. So you find that people are surprised, some were shocked that you could say this kind of things to demigods. But I think that's the background where that's how I explain it. That you are meeting people that there are people in government, there are people in public institutions like KWS who cannot even want to be associated with you. Because you have some fear, which I cannot explain, because the generation of my son and my daughter, they are the third generation after colonialism. There was our grandfathers who were who received serious, some of them serious beatings, some of them were tortured, some of them were taken to jail. Then there were people like us who were born in the 60s and early 70s and also 70s who never experienced that. But still they fear the Mzungu. Then there's a generation of my daughter and my son who will not say it openly, but even I know, because I used to have visitors, Mzungu visitors in my place. And the way you find people who are that time around 15, 18, 20, regarding the Mzungu, it's like they look at themselves like these lesser beings. So you wonder what's wrong with our people. Is it like this phobia is inherited? This trauma, this colonial trauma, how is it that that generation and probably even the fourth generation are inheriting it? What is it that the Muzungus did? Are they, I don't know, are they such good, do they have such good witchcraft? Or what is it? What is it? What is psychological?
It is psychological warfare that happened. And I'm interested because some of your biggest fans, the generation you're describing, don't even know this book exists. They do not know, because you find they're saying they contribute to some of the organizations that you expose here. When a poster is made, and I know I've watched some of the interviews with your co-author, Ogada, he's an apologetic when he shows the faces of conservation being all white. Yet, it is also the same, the people of goodwill among the white. Those ones who are born conscientious, they know what is right and wrong. Who follow you? What is your take? People get in a plane and come looking for you. And I don't know if they find the Mbaria they expect to find, like, your writing and you are like two different. I'm sure someone has asked you, your Mbaria, is this the Mbaria? People are fascinated with your courage. So for me, I feel it's a conflict of the same people that you say, look, you've misused our resources for far too long, are the same ones who want to read your book at university level. They want to travel to Africa, and not just to see the conservation, but now to see it from your lenses. How do you plan to use that to an advantage to educate the world that Africans can conserve their animals? Like there are 100, what do they say? 100 elephants killed every day? When they start campaigns like those, and you're watching and you know we don't even have those numbers. They say 100, an elephant is killed, I think it's somewhere in this book. Have you taken advantage of that vaccination with the truth?
It's very interesting that you find most of the people who are interested in the issues and also the book, most of them are actually from the US, Britain, Western countries. So you find in people who, I know there's this class at Denver University that used to come here every other year they used to come for experiential learning. This is the School of International Studies at Denver University. And every time they would invite me to talk about the book and give lectures to their students. So I'm having this young 20-something, like 30 of them. And when you start talking about the issues, the first thing that I would tell them is to unlearn. And then I would ask them, do you really believe that there's nothing between the ears of an African or a black person? Then I would ask them, who discovered America? They would say Christopher Columbus. Then I would shock them by telling, do you know black people went to cross the Atlantic, went to the Americas 2,000 years before Columbus? And then these guys are shocked. Then I'll continue challenging them and asking them, do you know anything about the pyramids? They say, yeah. They're in Egypt. Who constructed the pyramids? They don't know. Then I'll tell them, pyramids were constructed by black people. And the precision has never been reached to date. So we'll go on and on and on and on, and then I'll give them the lecture about the book. Yes, I've seen a lot of fascination with the issues that we deal with in the book, particularly coming from white people. So I take this advantage, I take this opportunity always to try and debunk some of the myths that they hold, right from the way they treat people, the way they look down upon us as black people. And it's very interesting that I've taken these guys, I've taught them for three years. And those 3 years, when they went back, because they normally come here for like two to 3 weeks. So when they're asked by their lecturer, because he normally gives me a feedback, they say that was the most interesting and informative session in the whole of the 3 weeks. Because they are taken to national parks, they are taken to communities, they are taken to places where communities even light fire using sticks. But that really
doesn't fascinate them.
But the fact that you are challenging them, you are challenging their whole notion, their whole approach, everything that they've had and everything that they hold, their philosophy, as young man, even though they are young minds, the fact that you are challenging everything that they know, everything that they've had through television and everything from their parents, from books, you find that you are having 3-hour lecture, and these guys, young people are normally not very attentive. Their attention span is small, but throughout the 3 hours, they are actually very attentive. Because you keep challenging. They ask so many questions, you respond to them. Then I also seen journalists coming from the West. Just the other day, I was invited for an interview by somebody who came from the Netherlands, where we sat with him for like 2 hours. And this is a guy who read the book and felt that he needed to do a program in a radio station. So it was this interview for a radio station which we did with him. And I realized that, when we wrote this book, we are not very sure how it's going to go. I cannot tell you that we knew that it's going to attract a lot of attention. No, we were just writing things that we knew people needed to know. But Kenyans also, I think they are also interested. We've had many talks at the National Museums of Kenya, at the Professional Center. We've had many talks. But still, if I compare, the attention we get from the West is much more. And I think that has to do with this, with them wondering how come that
Now, viewers, this book is not printed in Kenya, so it can be. They have to import it back, and it's sold in a bookstore called Nuria. It's on Moi Avenue Street. Yes. So we'll be back to talk not just about this book, but 20 years of writing in journalism and investigative journalism. Mbaria has put himself in harm's way. He has found himself almost dead in a street after being clobbered for a story. So join us as we do that part of his writing. He is a very prolific writer. You would love to read some of the articles he's written. So we'll come back and do up close and personal about some of the things that he has gone through as a result of being so daring, and some of the things he's still doing and daring the systems that we